The boardroom was deathly silent as I held up the flash drive, my gaze sweeping across the pale faces, my voice, firm and clear, cut through the heavy air like a knife. You think I didn't know that for all these years I was blind to your rotten secrets? My father, Rodrigo, stared at me with a mixture of hatred and despair. I'll never forget. Anna, you don't know what you're doing, he stammered, his voice trembling, not with authority, but with pure fear. I know exactly what I'm doing, Father. I'm saving what's left of our dignity. In that moment, with 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, I felt the weight of every lie, every betrayal. Every night, I slept beside a monster disguised as a patriarch. Project Orpheus was about to be exposed, and with it, the rot that had been eating away at our family for decades. But to understand how I got there, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Anna Miller, and for 28 years, I believed I was part of one of the most respected families in the country. I grew up amidst marble halls, baccarat crystal dinners, and hushed conversations about multi-million-dollar deals. Miller and Company wasn't just a biotech firm, it was an empire built by my grandfather, Henry Miller, a man I idolized as a hero of American medicine. Since childhood, I'd heard stories about how he revolutionized treatments for rare diseases, how his labs saved thousands of lives. On the walls of our century-old mansion, gold-framed photographs showed my grandfather receiving awards, shaking hands with presidents, smiling alongside Nobel laureates. I dreamed of following in his footsteps, studied medicine diligently, specialized in molecular genetics, all to one day take over the family legacy. My childhood was gilded, but not without sacrifice. While other children played carefree, I spent afternoons studying, memorizing medical terms, reading scientific articles I barely understood. My mother, Eleanor, always elegant in her silk dresses, demanded excellence in everything. My grades, my posture, the way I behaved at social events. "A Miller never shows weakness," she'd repeat as she brushed my hair each night. "We're different from other families. We have a greater responsibility." At 18, when I entered medical school, I saw the pride etched on my father's face. Rodrigo was an imposing man, with impeccably groomed graying hair and blue eyes that could be kind or icy depending on the circumstances. He'd taken over the company after my grandfather's death when I was 10, transforming Miller and Company into an international powerhouse. During college, I spent summers interning in the family labs. I remember the first time I stepped into the main building, 20 floors of glass and steel, with a breathtaking city view. In the immaculate corridors, scientists in white lab coats hurried past, carrying test tubes and confidential reports. I felt part of something grand, an heiress not only to fortunes but to knowledge that could change the world. I graduated summa cum laude, completed my doctorate in record time, and by 25 held a prominent position in the company. I worked directly with my father, overseeing research projects, analyzing investment proposals, attending meetings with international investors. Outwardly, we were the perfect family, united, prosperous, dedicated to science. But there were signs I chose to ignore. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room, documents my father kept in safes I couldn't access, frequent trips to Switzerland, always under the guise of strategic meetings, and there was Carla, my adopted sister, 3 years younger, who always seemed out of place in our family of scientists. She'd chosen visual arts, living in a modest studio downtown, painting abstract pieces my mother deemed a rebellious phase. Carla was different. She had curly hair she refused to straighten, wore colorful and casual clothes, and questioned everything. "Don't you find it strange that a biotech company is so secretive about its research?" she'd ask during Sunday dinners. My father would always change the subject, my mother would sigh disapprovingly, and I would defend the family. "Carla, you don't understand how intellectual property works. We have to protect our discoveries." The first sign that something was terribly wrong came one December night. I was working late in the office, reviewing quarterly reports, when I received a text message. The number was unknown, but the words chilled me to the bone. "You're no longer part of the family, they just haven't told you yet." Initially, I thought it was some kind of cruel prank, But then I started noticing subtle changes in the behavior of those around me. Secretaries avoiding my gaze, colleagues cutting off conversations when I approached, my own father seeming distant and evasive. When I directly questioned him about the message, he forced a laugh. "Anna, you're being paranoid. It must be some competitor trying to cause trouble." But the paranoia intensified when one January morning, I tried to access my office system and discovered my password had been changed. It claimed technical problems, but I knew I was being gradually excluded. That's when I decided to investigate on my own. The family mansion had a study that had belonged to my grandfather, kept untouched since his death, like a shrine. I took advantage of an afternoon when my parents were away at a medical conference in Boston and locked myself in that room full of memories. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with antique medical books, dusty awards and photographs, yellowed with age. Scene: Henry Miller's office day. It was while rummaging through locked drawers, the key to which I found hidden inside a fake volume of Gray's Anatomy, that I discovered the first clues to Project Orpheus. Contracts in German and French, stamps from Swiss banks, documents mentioning unauthorized clinical trials and terminal volunteer participants. And there was a name that appeared repeatedly on several pages: Cassiopeia. Next to this codename, written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were my initials, A.M. My heart pounded. Cassiopeia, the constellation my grandfather used to show me in the sky when I was a child, saying I was his brightest star. Why was my name associated with this mysterious project? I continued searching and found a thumb drive hidden inside a picture frame. When I connected it to the old computer in the office, I came across audio files recorded decades ago. My grandfather's voice, already elderly, was arguing with other men about promising genetic samples, extraordinary results in hopeless patients, and the need to maintain absolute secrecy. One of the recordings made my blood run cold. "She will be our perfect successor. She has the ideal genetic profile and the necessary intelligence. But if she discovers too much too soon, we'll have to take drastic measures. The project is bigger than any individual, even if it's my own granddaughter." At that moment, I understood that my whole life had been a lie. I wasn't the beloved heiress, I was a guinea pig. Project Orpheus had nothing to do with the altruistic cure of diseases. It was something far darker, and I was at the center of it all without even knowing. Trembling, I called Eleanor. "I need to see you urgently," I said, trying to control my voice. "It's about our family, about things you've always suspected." We met at her studio that same night. Eleanor lived in a small but cozy loft, with canvases scattered on the walls and a constant smell of acrylic paint in the air. When I told her about the recordings, she didn't show surprise, only a deep sadness. "Anna, I received the same message 6 months ago," she revealed, nervously fiddling with her brushes. "You're no longer part of the family, they just haven't told you yet." I thought it was about my sexual orientation, about the fact that I never fit into the Miller's standards, but now I understand it's much bigger than that. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, feeling betrayed once again. "Because you always defended them. You were the perfect daughter, the ideal heiress. I thought that if I told you, you'd think I was trying to cause trouble out of jealousy." Her eyes filled with tears. "But now I see that you were also a victim, maybe the biggest victim of all." We spent the whole night analyzing the documents I had found. Eleanor, with her artistic and intuitive mind, made connections that my rigid scientific training had missed. "Look here," she pointed to one of the pages. "These dates coincide with your routine medical checkups in childhood. And these numerical codes, they don't look like normal tests." The reality was more terrifying than I had imagined. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, the routine checkups I had were in fact genetic material collections. My blood, my saliva, even strands of my hair had been sent to clandestine laboratories in Europe. I was a living experiment, and my whole family knew it. "We need more proof," said Eleanor, always practical. "And we need to find out where the original samples are kept." But our investigation didn't go unnoticed. The next morning, when I tried to enter the company, the security guard informed me that my access had been revoked due to internal issues. I went straight to the executive floor, where my father was conducting a meeting with the main shareholders. I burst into the room without knocking. 20 men in suits stared at me with expressions ranging from surprise to embarrassment. My father slowly stood up, his face red with anger. Anna, you can't be here. This is a private meeting. Private for whom, Dad? For the guinea pig you created for 28 years? My voice came out louder than I intended, or should I say, for the Cassiopeia of Project Orpheus. The ensuing silence was deafening. Some men exchanged nervous glances, others lowered their eyes. My father stared at me with a coldness I had never seen before. You don't know what you're talking about. And even if you did, this is none of your business. You're not part of the family. There it was. The words that had arrived via message months ago, now pronounced by the man who raised me. I felt as if someone had ripped my heart out of my chest, but the pain soon turned into determination. I'm not part of the family, I repeated, walking towards the meeting table. Then explain to me why my genetic material has been stored in Swiss banks for over 2 decades. Explain to me why there are million-dollar contracts signed using my genetic code as collateral. The expression of some shareholders changed from embarrassment to panic. The company's lawyer, a thin man with dark glasses who had always given me the creeps, whispered something in my father's ear. Rodrigo nodded and addressed me in a controlled voice. Anna, you're clearly disturbed. We suggest you seek psychological help. As for your delusions about non-existent projects, this only confirms that you are no longer fit to work with us. That was the last straw. For years they had manipulated me, used me as an experiment, built a fortune at the expense of my ignorance. And now they had the audacity to question my sanity. Delusions? I shouted, pulling the thumb drive out of my pocket. So this is a delusion? My grandfather's recordings discussing how to turn me into the perfect guinea pig. The contracts with laboratories that violate all international human rights conventions. The effect was immediate. The lawyer stood up abruptly. My father paled, and several shareholders began to whisper among themselves. I had touched their exposed nerve. Security, my father yelled. Escort my daughter out of the building. She's not allowed here anymore. 2 enormous men flanked me, but I offered no resistance. I had gotten what I wanted, confirmation that I was right, and that they were desperate to silence me. If you've made it this far in the story, you know that sometimes the truth is more disturbing than any fiction. If you want to follow more stories like this, where seemingly perfect families hide devastating secrets, subscribe to the channel. Because this story is only just beginning, and you need to know how it ends. Eleanor was waiting for me in the parking lot. We'd agreed she'd keep watch while I confronted my father. How did it go? She asked, seeing my expression. Worse than we imagined. They're panicking, which means there's a lot more at stake. We got into her car, a yellow Volkswagen Beetle, that stood out sharply against the family's BMWs and Mercedes. We need to find the physical evidence before they destroy everything. Our next stop was the mansion. We knew my parents would be busy doing damage control at the company, so we had a few hours to explore areas of the house that had always been off-limits to us. The Miller Mansion was a labyrinth. Built in the early 20th century, it had undergone several renovations and expansions over the decades. The basement, in particular, had always been unexplored territory. My mother claimed it was just a storage area for old furniture, but the doors were always locked. We found the keys in my grandfather's study, an old heavy key ring that unlocked doors I didn't even know existed. The basement was much larger than we'd imagined. We descended a stone staircase that led to a long corridor with several side doors. The air was damp and heavy, with a strange smell I couldn't identify. The first room was crammed with documents piled up to the ceiling. Eleanor shone her phone's flashlight, and we began examining the stacks. They were medical reports, hundreds of them, from people of various ages and nationalities. All showed terminal illnesses, cancer, sclerosis, rare genetic dystrophies, and all had stamps indicating they had been selected for Project Orpheus. My God, Anna, Eleanor whispered, flipping through a report. Look at this. This woman had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It says here she underwent experimental gene therapy using Cassiopeia samples. The date is from when you were 15. My stomach churned. They had used my genetic material to experiment on desperate people, and from what I was seeing, these weren't isolated cases. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands of similar reports. In the second room, we found obsolete medical equipment, centrifuges, microscopes, industrial freezers that had been turned off for years. But it was in the third room that we discovered the heart of Project Orpheus. The walls were covered with charts and graphs documenting decades of genetic research. In the center of the room, a large table with drawers full of empty ampoules, syringes, and labels in various languages. It was one of the safeguards my grandfather created, probably in case something went wrong, and he needed me to take over the project. The trip was risky, but we had few options. We used the credit cards I still had access to, before my father canceled them, to buy last-minute tickets. During the flight, I continued studying the documents, memorizing names, dates, codes I would need to access the bank. Geneva was beautiful under the January snow, but we weren't there for sightseeing. The Société Générale was an imposing building in the city's financial center, with doormen who looked like guards and security protocols worthy of a spy movie. I introduced myself as Anna Cassiopeia Miller, heir to Project Orpheus. The manager, a middle-aged Swiss man with a strong accent, checked my documents with meticulous attention. "Fraulein Miller, we weren't expecting your visit so soon. Your father didn't inform us that you would be taking control of the repository." "My father doesn't need to know about all my movements," I replied, trying to sound authoritative. "I'm here for a routine inspection." What we found in the bank's underground vault surpassed my worst nightmares. Hundreds of biological samples organized in industrial freezers, each labeled with codes that corresponded to the reports we had found in the basement. There were samples of my blood collected, since I was 2 years old, tissues I didn't even remember donating, even eggs that had been extracted during an appendicitis surgery at 16. But the most shocking discovery was in a special section of the vault, dozens of frozen embryos, all created from my genetic material and sperm from selected donors. My potential children, created without my knowledge or consent, waiting to be implanted when the project scientists decided. Eleanor was visibly shaken. "Anna, this is a crime against humanity." "Not just a crime," I replied, photographing everything with my cell phone. "It's slavery. They turned me into a human breeding farm." We collected samples, photographed documents, recorded videos of the entire repository. We had enough evidence to bring down not only my family, but the entire network of scientists and financiers involved in the project. The flight back to Boston was tense. We knew that as soon as my father discovered our trip, he would take drastic measures, but we also knew that we now had enough power to protect ourselves. In fact, they found out before we even landed. When we arrived at Logan Airport, there were 2 men waiting for us. They weren't police officers, at least not in uniform. Eleanor saw them first. "Anna, those men, they're watching us." "Run," I whispered. "We split up here. You go to your studio, I'll go to a public place. We meet later." But it was too late. The men approached with false smiles. "Miss Miller, your father is worried. He asked us to escort you home." "No thank you," I replied, trying to move away. "I can go by myself." That's when one of them discreetly showed a gun under his jacket. "We insist." The next hour was a blur of terror. We were taken to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where my father was waiting for us along with the lawyer and several other men. The place smelled of chemicals and had equipment I'd rather not identify. "Anna," my father said in a sadly paternal voice, "you forced us to do this. If you had simply accepted your place in the family, none of this would have been necessary." "My place," I screamed, struggling against the ropes that bound me to the chair. "As a guinea pig, as a breeder, this was never a family, it was a laboratory. It was a revolutionary scientific project." He corrected. "You are the result of decades of genetic research. Your characteristics are not accidental. They were carefully planned and optimized. You are, literally, the future of humanity. I am a human being with rights. I am not your property." The lawyer approached with a syringe. "It will be quick and painless, and your death will contribute to scientific advancement. Your samples are already stored. We don't need you alive anymore." That's when I noticed something in Eleanor's eyes. She had managed to partially loosen her bonds and was preparing something. I tried to distract them. "Before I die, at least tell me how many people suffered because of this project." My father seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Suffered? Anna, we saved thousands of lives. People with terminal illnesses received revolutionary treatments based on your genetic material. You should be proud. And those who died in the experiments, those who were used as guinea pigs without consent, necessary sacrifices for the greater good, he replied. Without hesitation, that's when Eleanor acted. In a swift move, she freed herself completely and kicked over a can of chemical solvent, spreading it across the floor. The next second, she lit the lighter she always carried for her cigarettes and yelled, "Back off, or I'll burn this whole place down." Panic was immediate. The men recoiled. My father yelled at her not to do anything foolish, and the lawyer dropped the syringe. In the chaos, I managed to free myself as well, and we grabbed the evidence they had confiscated from us. "This isn't over," my father shouted as they ran for the exit. "You can't destroy us. We're bigger than you think." But we were already gone, running through the Boston night, with our evidence intact and a final plan. The exposure was meticulous. First, we contacted investigative journalists from independent outlets, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated by the family's influence. Then, we